Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dear students, in our series of hypothesis testing, we have covered right tail test, left tail test, two tail test, and z test. And you have learned how to use the t statistic and z statistic in the hypothesis testing. So now I'm just working on the type 1 error. I'm just giving you the concept of the type 1 and type 2 error. And this is really very much important to your hypothesis testing. So that's why I'm just explaining what's the difference between the type 1 and type 2 error, dear students. So look here, the type 1 error is when we reject the null hypothesis when it's actually true, right? And the type 2 error is when we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it is actually false. So dear students, keep in mind, when you do hypothesis testing, so there are some steps and you have learned in all these different scenarios. So the first step is that to state the null hypothesis, null and alternative hypothesis. When you have a scenario or example, then you are stating what is your null hypothesis as we have here. Look, so this was our first step, stating the null and alternative hypothesis. And the second step was to choose your significance level, okay? And if the confidence interval is 95%, then the significance level is 0.05. Why? Because 1 minus 0.95 is 0.05. And once you choose your significance level, then you are choosing what test statistic you are using, just depending on your data. If your sample size is less than 30, right, and the standard deviation is not known, then you are using this test. But if the sample size is greater than 30 and the standard deviation is known, then you are using this test, dear students. Okay, in the third step, you are choosing the test statistic. But in the fourth steps, you are collecting the sample data, right, and computing the test statistic, okay? It means you are just computing the sample data and find out the mean value, and from the mean value you are just computing the test statistic. In our example, the test statistic value we have computed, this is the test statistic value. And then you should find out the critical value, and this is the critical value, dear student. Why? Because the intersection of the significance level and degree of freedom, when you just go into the distribution table, you can find out the critical value. So in the fifth steps, you find out the critical value or p-value. If you remember, I have also taught you how to find out the p-value. So either you have a critical value or a p-value. And then once you have a critical value, you find out your t-value using the t-statistic in step number 4. Then you are comparing this t-value with the critical value. You are comparing the critical and t-value and making decision, dear students. If the t-value is greater than the critical value, then you are rejecting the null hypothesis. And if it's not, you are failing to reject the null hypothesis, dear students. Now, the second step is to choose the significance level alpha. This is actually talking about the type 1 and type 2 error, dear student. What is type 1 error? Indeed, the type 1 error is our alpha. Why? Because the significance level in our example is 0.05. This means we are willing, or we are sure that we are rejecting the null hypothesis in the area of 5% when it is actually true, dear students. Okay, let me just give you this example through graph. For example, we have the normal distribution graph here, right? In this graph, I'm sorry if it is not looking okay. This is not somehow nice. Okay, just once more. So this is the graph of normal distribution, dear students. Okay, this is normal distribution. Okay, here we have the central value. This is the central value just coming here. This is the central value, right? Now, if you choose the alpha 0.05 significance level, it means you are just rejecting the null hypothesis in this area. This is the area where you are rejecting the null hypothesis. And this area is 0.0 point, right? 0.05%, dear student. Okay, 0.05%. This is 5. And this area is 95%, dear student. Okay, simply. Now, this is the critical region, this point. This is the critical region. In our example, this is 1.1.7, 1.7, and 96. Okay, this critical region we have taken from the T distribution using these two information, significance level and degree of freedom. Now, dear students, when we are choosing 0.055% alpha, right, it means here we are committing the type 1 error. What is type 1 error? When we reject the null hypothesis when it's actually true. Yes. So this is the central value. This is the central value is representing the hypothesized mean. For example, this is 5 in our example. This is the 5. Look, 5. So we say if you are significantly farther than the central value, right, above this 1.7 critical value, and when the test statistic lies in this region, we are rejecting the null hypothesis, right? But keep in mind, we are rejecting the null hypothesis in this area, even then the null hypothesis is true. It's mean we are intentionally rejecting. Why we say in 5% chance that the null hypothesis is true, it's not acceptable for me. Why? Because this is the central value in the normal distribution. All these values around the central values, right? They are related to this null hypothesis. This is the confidence interval of null hypothesis. So we say this central value is representing, this is representative mean of all these values. So if your test statistic lies above this region, it means still this null hypothesis is a mean of the population, true mean of population, but there is only 5% chance that it's a mean of the true population. So we say no, in the 5% chance we are not accepting the null hypothesis, we are rejecting the null hypothesis. Even though the test statistic value which just come here, still there is 5% chances that the null hypothesis is true, right? But we are not accepting the null hypothesis in 5% chance. So that is why the alpha we are choosing, we say what is the level of type 1 error we are committing. So the type 1 error is exactly the alpha, right? And this is 0.05. And we are allowed to reject the null hypothesis and under the alpha. Why? Because in this situation, the probability or the chances that this is the true population mean is only 5% and we are rejecting. So what is the definition of the type 1 error? When we reject the null hypothesis when it is actually true. Yes, here in 5% we are rejecting the null hypothesis when it's actually true. But in this 5% is not acceptable for me because the test statistic value in this 5% is considered too much farther here. So you can say there is another mean which is greater, and that is somehow the true population parameter, true population mean, dear students. Okay, what is the the type 2 error here? The type 2 error is when we fail to reject the null hypothesis. So when you just try to reduce the alpha, the significance level from 0.05 into 0.1, sometime in researches, we are interested in the lower significance level. So if you choose the significance level of 99%, so this area is just coming 0.01%, 0.01%. It's mean when you're just moving this critical value even into the right side and you are just shrinking, reducing this area, so there is more chances you are not rejecting the null hypothesis, right? If you are just getting closer, it means the interval is just getting closer here into the mean value, it means you have more chances of type 1 error. But when you just reduce this level or the chances, or you can say the alpha, the type 1 error, in the same time the chances of type 2 error, dear student, increasing. Why? Because when you move this critical region even to the right side, it means it's less likely to reject the null hypothesis. And you are giving chance to reject the null hypothesis and not to be rejected, and it might be false, dear student. When you just move this critical region here and you are, the significance level you choose is not 5% and 1%, it means then you say that I'm just only rejecting the null hypothesis in this area, for example, not from this in the whole area. level here. So the chances of rejection of the null hypothesis is too low here. Why? Because you are too strict and you want 99% for the confidence interval. So in this situation, there is more chances, dear students, that you may not reject the null hypothesis when it's indeed false. Yeah, why? Because in this 99% or 0.01 alpha significance level, there is highly chances that this null hypothesis is false, but you do not reject it because you are so strict. You brought this critical region into this place. So that's why then the chances of the type 2 error is there. So what is the type 2 error? When we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it's actually false. Yeah, and that happens only when you just reduce the significance level from 0.05. You just move this critical region even into the right side, dear student. This is the concept of type 1 and type 2 error. So learn, dear students, in hypothesis testing, the second step, which is to choose the significance level alpha, this is, yes, you are choosing the type 1 error. And most of the time you hear that what is the type 1 error. So even in steps you see the first step is state in alternative hypothesis. In the second step you might see to choose the type 1 error. So simply the type 1 error is the alpha, the significance level, right? And we are committing the type 1 error in our research, and that is usually 0.05 or 0.01 or it's zero point 0.1. Sometimes we just bring the alpha into 0.01. It's been 90%, then it's coming in this area. So conclusion, when you increase the alpha level, then the chances of type 2 error is decreasing, right? But when you decrease the alpha level, right, reducing the alpha level and moving into the right side, the chances of the type 2 error increases, dear students. Hopefully the concept of the type 1 and type 2 error is clear. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.